Hello and welcome to the CivilTalk Podcast. I'm your host, Topacio. If you're new to the show, this is where we explore civility and social emotional learning with esteemed guests, expert insights, and practical advice to help people navigate the world. Today, I'm honored to welcome Dr. Marcella Runell Hall, a distinguished scholar, educator, and national leader in social justice education, student development, and multi-faith engagement. Dr. Hall currently serves as the Vice President for Student Life and Dean of Students at Mount Holyoke College, where she also lectures in religion. Prior to this role, she was the founding co-director of Many Institute for Multi-Faith Leadership at NYU and program director for the university's minor in multi-faith and spiritual leadership. Her work lies at the intersection of spirituality, equity, and student well-being, which has been widely recognized for its innovation and impact. She is also the co-author of Uncommon Bonds, Women Reflect on Race and Friendship with Dr. Kersha Smith, a collection of essays written by women representing multiple identities, all uniquely addressing the impactful experiences of race, ethnicity, and friendship. She has also co-created numerous award-winning student programs, including Faith Zone, Ally Week, and the Hip-Hop and Pedagogy Initiative. And today she continues to shape national conversations around race, faith, identity, and student engagement, drawing from both rigorous scholarship and decades of practical leadership. Today we'll be talking about her work at the intersection of emotional intelligence, identity, and social justice, and how we can build communities grounded in truth, empathy, and connection. Dr. Hall, it's a true pleasure to have you here with us today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd like to just start from the beginning. You've led, a very wide interdisciplinary career and have a large background spanning social justice, student development, multi-faith leadership, and, a slew of writings across race and identity. What first called you to this work, and what did that early journey look like for you personally or professionally?
It's a great question. I think for me as a child, I grew up in the Northeast. I was born in Washington, D.C., grew up in New Jersey and New York and back to New Jersey again. And at the time that I was growing up in the 80s, I would say now I would use this label as like kind of a seeker. Like I was always looking for, connection. I had questions about religion. I had questions about, all kinds of sort of like philosophical questions about the way that people kind of, make meaning of life, even as a child. And I also moved around a lot. And so I was in and out of different schools and different communities. And so I was, for a long period of time, I felt like the perpetual new kid. And so I think those two things together really set me on this journey of looking at the world through kind of a critical lens. Like what are the things that I'm really like confused about that don't make a lot of sense to me. And so one foundational part of that was race and racism. Early adolescence, I had, some like really important, significant interracial friendships and relationships. And at the same time, I was learning about race and racism in the world because apartheid was happening in South Africa. So that was my frame that was really like powerful and important. And I felt like the only place that I could get like kind of information was coming through music. Like hip hop was this place where I felt like there was a lot of truth telling about race and racism and about class and about human condition that I wasn't seeing in my teachers. I wasn't seeing it in other adults. Like I just didn't see that kind of authenticity, or even an ability to engage. Yeah. And so to me, all of that, those interpersonal relationships, but also those questions, those big questions that I had, that curiosity, and frustration really led me to think about, higher education and think about what I wanted to do when I got to college. And so that's where I would say I'd started was with those childhood um, musings.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, so that brought you to, build initiatives, but also I want to talk about your book as well, Uncommon Bonds, written or co-authored with Dr. Kersha Smith, which explores the dynamics of race and friendship amongst women. What made you feel that this was the right time to curate and elevate these kinds of personal stories?
So what's really interesting about that book project, and even though it's spelled Kersha, it's actually pronounced Keisha. So Keisha and I were, and still are, we were good friends. And we lived in the same neighborhood in Brooklyn, and we had lots of things in common prior to having our first children. But then we ended up having our babies at the same time. So our children are just a couple weeks apart. And so we really had time to build our friendship, bonding over, parenting. And both of our kids identify as biracial because both of us were in interracial relationships at the time. And so we talked a lot about race and we talked a lot about identity. And one of the things that Keisha said was, that she didn't have very many friends. Keisha identifies as Black and as a cis woman, and she didn't have very many friends that she would consider to be like interracial friendships, right? Most of her friends were other Black women. And so, but then she looked at me and she said, but you do have more of these friendships. So like, why is that? Mm-hmm. And, as we were talking about that, like I pointed back to things that I knew kind of had differentiated my childhood because I moved around a lot, because I was very curious, because I challenged a lot of, my own assumptions around relationships, even as a child. I think that made it maybe a little easier for me to build relationships as an adult, because that's actually fairly unusual in our society for people to maintain a lot of cross-race relationships into adulthood. There's like a few key moments in our experiences, usually like the start of school, like around kindergarten, sometimes around college, but there's really, and workplace, friendships. Those are the places where people tend to have the ability to have interracial or cross-racial friendships. But other than that, the data suggests that we as a group, as a society, we don't engage intimately outside of those times. And so she and I talked a lot about it. And she was really interested in, asking other people what they thought about it. And I think both of us were really nervous about taking something so sacred and so special and turning it into a book that would put our friendship out there as well as other people's friendships. So it genuinely came from sitting around drinking wine, talking, and bonding about all these different things, and a lot of storytelling, to this place of taking that curiosity and that question and opening it up for other people to tell their stories.
Yeah, I love that. I love this. The book really honors discomfort, and it really honors, messiness, and nothing that's a friendship or cross-racial friendships that aren't tidy or idealized. And I really love the truth in that. And you mentioned in your author's note that, the book isn't just about friendship, and that's kind of what you are talking about right now. It's about truth telling. And so my question is, what does that truth telling require emotionally from women, especially women who've learned to prioritize harmony over honesty?
Oh, such a good question. So one thing that I guess I will start with is I have a bias towards this idea that like relationships are really what life is all about. Like I actually believe that. So I come from that perspective, right? So I believe that, that is how we learn about ourselves. That's how we learn about the world. And so therefore, these relationships, I mean, starting with ourselves, but then expanding to all the different people around us, family, chosen family, et cetera. That's how we evolve, how we learn. And the thing about that is that it is really hard to grow or to really, sort of get to the next level, like level up in your own, kind of understanding of yourself without that kind of like rigorous commitment to truth telling.
Yeah.
And I think that many women are socialized to be people pleasers. And I think that people pleasing gets rewarded. And the people pleasing comes in the form of avoiding conflict. It comes in the form of, half truths. It comes in the form of pushing things down. And I think that becomes even more dangerous and toxic, really, when you're thinking about cross-racial friendships, because there's already so much history there. There's already pain. Even if it's not about the two individuals, there's context for the pain. There is history. There are real reasons for particularly for women of color to be suspicious or non-trusting of white women in those friendships. As an example, there are many different configurations of how that could play out, but that's one example where the history would suggest that there has been harm done. And so if you're not bringing your whole self, your 100%, your A game on your truth telling, you're likely to end up really perpetuating some of those same dynamics. And so I think that's why we started the book that way, to say that these friendships are not superfluous. They're not meant to be, there's nothing to talk about if we're talking about superficial relationships and friendships. Like, the world knows how to do that. This was really trying to get at that messiness, which is so beautiful and also so uncomfortable.
Yeah, I mean, it's just human, and there's a lot of nuance when it comes to friendships, whether it be cross-racial or not. But another thing I like about your book is there's a deep thread, and you're talking about this right now, of grief and growth in the stories, grief for ruptured friendships, unspoken assumptions, or identities never fully seen. What did you personally learn about repair, accountability, or silence while working on this project?
I think that I had a lot of opportunity to reflect on the conversations that I never had. Meaning, as I was, editing the book and we were reading stories, it was kind of troubling sometimes to see like people describing things. And it's like, I do remember when I had that friendship and then we just never talked again. Or I remember when I felt that kind of like something's not right, but I wasn't brave enough to ask or to check in. Or worse, things where it's like, clearly I made a mistake, or I, like put my foot in it and I didn't acknowledge it at the time. Like, I wasn't courageous enough or, confident enough to do that. So I think there was a lot of self-reflection for me on what doesn't get said. And how often that can happen, and how friendships, I also have a perspective about friendship that I think friendships are a really under-examined part of human development. Like, meaning I think sometimes we take them for granted. Like, they're just always going to be there. And if one doesn't work out, there'll be another one that will come. And these kinds of friendships, things we're talking about in the book, that's not actually the way it goes. There isn't always a next one that's going to come. These are friendships that people put their hearts into, or they risked something to be in them. And so when they don't work out, it does hurt. It is painful. It is, it is something that needs attention, just as any other ruptured friendship or relationship would need.
Yeah, it takes, verbal accountability as well, and I love that. I love the idea of the necessity of watering your friendships just as much as your romantic friendships, or just as much as you're watering yourself. What is a tip that you can give our listeners on how friends can sort of hold space for each other as they evolve and become more conscious of their, friends, or become more racially conscious, especially, and this is, tough for some people, especially when one person's growth feels like a disruption to the relationship.
Yeah. Well, to answer the first part of the question, I treat my friendships, as if they are they have the cornerstones, like they are the thing, right? So I have two daughters. Obviously, being a mom to them is my most important relationship, but my friendships are the thing that I build my life around. So, my friends are the ones that I celebrate big milestones with, that I plan, trips with, that I go to, when things are, going great and when things are not. And they require maintenance, they require work in the best possible way, meaning like those friendships that are really that like life affirming and fortifying for me, and I know many women who also feel like this. It's because there's reciprocity. They're friendships that really are mutually significant, mutually beneficial. And then I have other friends that are the friends you talk to like once a year, or you text, or you're all in a friend group when you get together. And I have like many different configurations, but the really important, powerful ones to me are those ones that are prioritized. And I think that is something I wish I knew sooner. I wish I knew when I was younger that some of these friendships and relationships were going to be with me for my entire life, and that that I should treat them that way. I didn't know. I didn't know how important relationships were, until I was out of college, and I started to see how much those relationships in college had changed me, and for the good. In terms of the other parts about identity and the other pieces of this, I think that you know there is something really brave about being able to admit to someone that you're growing, and that you're you've made a mistake, or whatever it is that you need to do to repair. But I think there's something even braver in being able to then take responsibility for it and figure out how you're going to manage your healing around that. And so I think it's different than just saying like, oh, I'm sorry, yes, I said that thing and it offended you, and here's why, right? I mean, that's like, okay, way better, I think, to be able to say, I'm noticing this in myself, and I'm noticing I'm getting defensive about this, and so like I need to figure out what's going on, and then go do your work and figure it out. Right? Like your friends don't need to be responsible for all of that labor. They can be a part of the journey, but they should agree. They should be able to consent if they want to be a part of it. It's not automatic. And that goes across multiple things. That can be sharing grief around losing a parent, or having a different financial status than a friend, or going through a divorce and a friend who's happily married, or like there's a lot of things that happen in life that you may unintentionally trigger each other or insult each other, or whatever it is. But the idea that you can name it, talk about it, but then also feel like it's okay to go do your own work and figure out what's going on, I think is like a really loving thing to do.
Yeah, it is a loving thing to do. Really responsibility, especially when you meet friends or people who have the same values as you, and you're really, you feel strongly about your values, and you want to uphold them. When you find friends, people, romantic partners who have the same values as you, and there's some sort of break in the friendship or in the relationship, upholding those values is so important. And that's when you feel the need to take an individual responsibility and change and grow. And I love that.
Yes.
So, Yeah. So you've done so much work that I'm honestly just really inspired by. And one of them is, we'll get into a few of them, but one of them is Faith Zone, which provides students and educators with tools to engage across religious and spiritual differences. I'd like to hear about, how do you see spiritual literacy as a form of emotional intelligence, if at all?
So, when I described my childhood and I was talking about being a seeker, a big part of that was experimenting with going to different like services or other things with friends. So, I had, friends who they would have, like Hebrew school on Saturday mornings. And I had friends who would go to CCD on Sundays, that were Catholic. And I had friends that would do like vacation Bible school and, like a range of different experiences. And I was always interested in going. Like I just was fascinated by, what it meant to like sort of have a piece of this, this community, or to be a part of something and to be able to ask questions and sort of, think about hard things and big things. And that has stayed with me throughout my life. And I got really interested in like this intersection of spirituality and like calling, like, like Parker Palmer, like looking at purpose. And then I went even deeper and looked at the way religion and, civil rights work and human rights work have like intersected with each other. When you look at someone like MLK or Malcolm X and you look at their backgrounds and how their religions helped to define their work. And so fast forward to my time at NYU, and we were building this multi-faith institute, and we were focusing on what that meant to have this religious literacy be a part of your skill set. And we came up with this idea that we could do some like kind of based on like safe zone. So that's something that comes out of LGBTQ movements, right? That's really around providing information, giving people language and tools to be able to talk about sexual orientation and gender. We really took that and thought, what would that look like if we could do that to talk about religion and spirituality? If we just had some baseline information so that we could start the conversation on a bit more of a level playing field in the workplace or in the classroom or a residence hall or anywhere where people are intersecting with each other when there's a lot of misinformation. Because the biggest thing is that there is often a fear of asking questions, which then leads to more misinformation and miscommunication. And so Faith Zone is like this moment where you get to, have this experience where it's okay to ask questions, and you can like download the sort of basics like this. These are like the world's major religions. These are the populations. These are some of the holidays. These are some of the things people might say, as they're talking about how they practice, like just stuff, but like it's kind of like behind the curtain, like the things you wish you knew when you were going into places that, you didn't have all the information. So Faith Zone is a really exciting project for me because it gave a space to do something that I saw as being a gap in a lot of diversity and social justice work.
Yeah, it's a safe space. It seems like a safe space for curious people.
Yes.
It's not a safe space for people who are trying to denigrate other religions or spiritual, differences, and I love that because curiosity really is a fixer for, if you lead with curiosity, if you ask a question with curiosity, people can hear that,
Yes.
without judgment. And I think it's so important to have spaces for that. And I really love the idea of how Faith Zone really intertwines with what you were talking earlier about hip hop.
Yeah.
And, you also have the Hip-Hop and Pedagogy Initiative as well, which sort of centers, from what I've gleaned, culture, storytelling, and rhythm as tools for teaching.
Yeah.
And myself, a huge hip hop fan, I love Gangstar and like Tupac, people who are real poets, and have spiritual leanings. And I think people who are seekers really can find a nook, a little corner in a lot of the verses or in a lot of the beats too, and just feel like kind of comforted by what they're saying. I'd love to hear more about your work with Hip-Hop and Pedagogy Initiative and how that really helps the students you work with tap into their own emotional truth and agency.
So for me, as I, was telling you, like my adolescents were really like shaped by these big questions, and hip hop was this place and this space that I could really like grow and but also heal, but also like find community. Like there was a lot in hip hop culture for me, both in high school and in college. But it was all personal and largely private or like with friends, right? When I got to NYU for grad school, it was the first time that I met people who were hip hop scholars,
Mm.
and like Trisha Rose and Robin Kelly and Nelson George. And I was just like amazed. Like I felt like it really did feel like a spiritual experience to me, that this was all coming together, and like I could take classes with them and I could like interact with them and go listen to them give talks, and it absolutely connected to religion and to spirituality for me and for so many other people, as you mentioned. And so I found at that time that I had to kind of make a choice. And as I was getting ready to go to my doctorate in education, I had to like kind of choose, like, was I going to stay focused on spirituality and like sort of that civil rights, social justice part of spirituality, or was I going to focus more on hip hop and hip hop pedagogy as a social justice um, framework? And what I finally ended up doing was talking to a lot of mentors and doing a lot of, of work, self work on what would be highest and best use of my voice and my identities. And one of the things that felt really important to me was that for me, going out in the world and writing about hip hop and talking about hip hop might make other teachers who are majority white women, right? So still majority of teachers, 90%, I think, of K-12 teachers are white women, might make them more likely to feel like they could utilize hip hop in a way to connect with students. And so that was part of it, was this idea of like this almost like a responsibility. Like hip hop had done so much for me, and I felt like as I'm talking to all these people and I'm having all this access, I'm getting to interview people and like be in different schools that are using hip hop in their curriculum. It was like a what can I do? Like what will be the next best, like next right thing for me to do. And so I started writing a lot of research papers and doing a lot of my work. And I got so far along in it that my advisors were like, you probably should just do your dissertation on this. There's probably more here. And so that's how I ended up spending so much of my time writing, thinking about hip hop, was this idea of putting something out in the world that could be useful to teachers and to other educators, that ultimately would impact students, right? Like it would make students' lives better. Because had I had just one teacher when I was growing up that would have been willing to talk about race and racism, or, oh my gosh, if they had brought hip hop into the classroom, like KRS-One, like that back then, to me, that would have been like, you've, just made my whole life, but I didn't have that. So it was really about that. It was like, what can I do? Like what makes sense? And so I got to NYU to work after I was, finishing up, and there were amazing faculty and students and staff who were even more committed, more enmeshed in hip hop culture. And the idea for the Hip Hop Pedagogy Initiative was complete collaboration. Like, how do we bring all this together at NYU in a way that then can also have community impact? So it was a project I was so proud of to be a part of it, because it was like really energizing and it felt like we were really doing something, meaningful.
Yeah, New York seems like the best place to do that too. New York already has like this energy to it, this like just like really cool energy to it. So that must have been really exciting to do it. And the city's just so abundant with culture already,
Yes.
and it has a huge hip hop and art. You think of like Basquiat and like Madonna and like
Yes.
Fun and Biggie Smalls and all these huge dynamos, who really hail from there. That must have been really exciting.
It was. And the energy of it. I mean, it led me to, people like Martha Diaz, who I ended up collaborating on. And Martha Diaz is like an incredible like author, educator, curator. We did the Hip Hop Education Guidebook together, and she founded the Hip Hop Association. I mean, she's, it was like a dream to get to meet her and then to get to work with her on projects. So yes, the energy of New York is definitely something really, really special.
Yeah. And I'm sure, is it still ongoing? I mean, there's so many, hip hop initiatives too. And like, I go to New York, even here in LA where I'm based, and there's like, DJing, vinyl DJing, and that really, I love this interconnection that you have with not only just sort of like the coolness of hip hop in general, but also have the relation to spirituality. Because even for myself too, it's so important to connect those two.
Yes.
It's important to, obviously people love hip hop for hip hop's sake and music for music's sake, but there is a certain energy to it, a frequency. Every note has a certain hertz to it, and it kind of like vibrates your body in a certain way. Just when you're thinking about it on like just a biological, like tactile level, and I love that connection, and especially for students who are just so, malleable at that age and need to sort of be positively molded,
Absolutely. I mean, to your question, is it still going on? Absolutely. There are many, many people who are doing different pieces of the hip-hop pedagogy work at NYU and beyond. And the National Conference on Race and Ethnicity in Higher Education is happening next week. There's a whole day dedicated to hip-hop. I think scholars like Rosa Clemente and some others are part of that. And so it's alive and well. And the 50-year anniversary of hip-hop a couple of years ago, that was like a really big moment where I think, Martha Diaz did something at Lincoln Center about women in hip hop. So there's so much still happening. And I think as hip hop has matured, as we've matured, like as people, as fans, I think it changes the conversations. So very much still alive and well.
It's amazing. Okay, so we're gonna have one or two more questions. So, you've helped a lot of people find their voice, their truth, their courage. What's one personal, emotional, or spiritual practice that you return to personally that helps you stay grounded in the wide work that you do?
Several years ago, I read a book called The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. It's one of my favorite books. And I was in a small working group with two people I would consider to be chosen family, Imani Rosa Chapman and Pat Romney. And the three of us, they're a mother and daughter, by the way. But they also are their own amazing, educators. And they're just incredible authors, all of it. But the three of us were in this little group together doing The Artist's Way. And I learned in that book, we met regularly. I learned in that book this practice of morning pages, which is like this sort of like just brain dump in the morning, like first thing, you just like let it all out. And I remember thinking like, that's so cool. Like, I wish I could like have the discipline to like do something like that. But, like I have kids and like job and I don't know. So I started trying it. And I am so happy to tell you that I am like, I would say probably 95% of the time I am able to do morning pages in the morning, like start out in the morning with that practice. And it is incredible the things I can like get out of my brain, that I can work through, that I can focus on. And I use it for whatever I need it for. If I'm I'm processing something, I'm wondering something, if I have gratitude that I want to express, like it really is just like this commitment every morning to starting that way. And that's probably one of the most important practices that I have learned and developed and kept, that I think has been, it's helped me make some really big, important life decisions. So it's been really transformational.
That's amazing. I bet you it just, it sets the tone for the day.
It does. It does. Well, and it just helps you to get a better sense of like how you really feel about things. Because I think so much of our lives we're presenting because it's the context, right? Like we're in a particular mode, wake up in the morning and it's pretty raw. It's like, I don't want to feel jealous or angry about this thing, but I do, right? Or like, I don't, I thought I was like over this thing, but I'm not, or like whatever it is, like it just is very liberating.
Yeah.
To have commitment.
Yeah, that can be confronting. That's like shadow work.
It is. It is.
Like, some people aren't strong enough to do that, to be honest. It sounds simple. But it's like this stuff comes up in the morning. And you're like, I don't want to deal with that.
Right. But the great thing is if you get it out, it's not because it's with you no matter, right? Like it's like going to be with you. Like you're going to be carrying the burden, right? So sometimes for me, it's just like I've noticed this since I started doing this. I've gotten better at like leaving it on the page. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of like it's out now. Like I don't have to like all day long be ruminating on like that conversation because I wrote it down and I said what I said. Like, like this is how I felt about it, and sometimes I have to go back and write about it a lot of times till it feels like it's really resolved, but it is liberating. It's like a commitment to yourself, right? Like, it's just this sort of, like it's like a kind thing to do for yourself.
Yeah. And we're going back to what you were saying earlier. It's a kind thing to do to the people around you too. Because you don't want to bring that stuff to the station and you're like, whoops, like, of course your friends are there to support you, every once in a while, but you also gotta, as you're doing, put it on the page and let it stay there.
Yeah.
So it's important to work for yourself and for that's the work right there. When people are like, how do I do it? Things like that, are really important. And it's funny because it seems so simple, but sometimes the easiest way is the most impactful way,
I completely agree with that. During my time at NYU doing the spiritual life work, Gabby Bernstein was just sort of like coming out. I think she did her second book, and I don't know if you're familiar with her work, but she does like she basically took like A Course in Miracles, Marianne Williamson's work, and then translated into kind of like more of like millennial, like and then I probably even Gen Z now, like they sort of like translated it. But she would come sometimes and do workshops for us while she was like promoting books and other things. And she would talk about the tools, like the spiritual tools. And a lot of it is simple. Like it's not like the tools change. The tools are like timeless. It's our ability to like be consistent with them or to utilize them or to get comfortable, like that it doesn't have to be perfect, like I think that's the other part. That's why I said the 95% about morning pages, because I would never want someone to be like, oh, well, I can't do it every day, so then I might as well not do it at all. It started out probably 50%, and I worked my way up because I like it so much. It's easy to do it, right? It feels good, but it's like working out or anything else, right? It doesn't feel good in the beginning, like it's some work, but that's meditation and, gratitude, journaling. There's a lot of things that we know are good tools. They're not that complicated. But sometimes there's an obstacle in getting just started using them.
Yeah, it's the hardest part. Well, thank you. We really appreciate your insight, and hopefully our listeners and your listeners will be able to take away a few of the amazing wisdoms that you've offered today. We really appreciate you being here with us.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your generosity and your kindness. This was really lovely to talk to you.
Yeah, likewise. It's been a pleasure. If you'd like to learn more about Dr. Hall's writing, we highly recommend checking out her books, or her book, Uncommon Bonds, Women Reflect on Race and Friendship, and to continue engaging with the spaces in your life where truth, discomfort, and connection can coexist civilly. And don't forget to subscribe to the CivilTalk Podcast and share this episode with anyone who you think could benefit. And until next time, stay curious and stay kind.